Hello and welcome to Newspeak, New Culture Forum's look at the weekly news agenda. I'm joined by, as usual, by our senior fellow, Rafe Heydel-Mankoo, historian and moral commentator, and making her first appearance on this show, Laura Dodsworth, who I have to say, she's on the channel recently talking about her new book, which is Free Your Mind, which actually is now just entered the bestseller charts, hasn't it?
Yes, very happy to say it's landed in the Sunday Times bestseller list in its first week on sale.
I think that's worth a second plug, actually, Laura.
Oh,
there we go.
You.
So
well, maybe it's all down to this lovely interview you gave us on New Culture Forum.
No, it's great to have you on. Before we talk about actually our subjects this week, just one thing I wanted to bring to your attention, and that is, you remember The West, which was the wonderful 6-part documentary we did about Western civilization, why it's such a great thing, why we should defend it. We've actually created a new separate site for it, so you can go to this site and see all the programs as well as some of the wonderful things people have said about it, but most importantly, all of the series is there laid out. So go to westerncivilization.co.uk, it'll be under this video, and you'll see the West there. As you know, it was presented and written by Mark Sidwell, did a wonderful job, I think. So that's the West. Anyway, back to the reality of the cultural fight this week. We're going to talk about banks, actually. Nigel Farage obviously has really opened up Pandora's box here. Whether or not he meant to, he certainly has. Going to be talking about that. Also, the new, your great hero Sadiq Khan, mine too, started a new campaign, yet another new campaign. This one around violence towards women and girls, which is basically broadly MATE, which we're going to be discussing. And finally, is basically converting shops and old takeaway shops into homes. Is that really the solution for our homeless crisis? The Tory government would seem to think it is. First things first then, Rafe. Alluded to it there. With the banks situation, with Nigel Farage having caused, actually quite directly, the resignation of chairman and the chief executive, I'm very pleased to say, right? Has he almost stumbled across a kind of way in to the whole battle that we talk about week on week, which is this huge institutional capture?
Yes, I don't think we can overstate just how significant this is. I mean, I think this is the biggest victory for Farage since the Brexit campaign, and all those who had said that or assumed that Farage was a busted flush and just an inconsequential figure on a small TV station have been left with egg on their face, because he has exposed, as you've said, that this is more than just the battle of one man to retain access to his elitist bank. This is about a broader issue of banks debanking thousands, potentially tens of thousands of average people who don't have the platform that he's had. And had it not been for the fact that he has had this platform, this issue, I think, would have continued to exist beneath the surface, inevitably until the Labour Party got into power after the next election, if it does, as we all assume it will do. And as we've seen from the lacklustre defence that the Labour Party have given to this issue, when we've seen shadow ministers essentially agreeing with the bank, we've had Rachel Reeves saying that the loss of Alison Rose was actually a blow to women's rights and feminism, rather than actually the fact that she broke client confidentiality. I think this is a hugely important issue, and it has huge ramifications and repercussions, because I don't think there is any tool in the woke arsenal that's more powerful than to deny people access to a bank account. It is the most crucial and vital aspect that enables one to remain a functioning part of society. And if you remove that, then I think that threat of removing that is more than anything else likely to cow someone into silence.
But I think, actually, I don't know what you think about this, Laura, but it seems to me that people were largely unaware of all this kind of banking activity, weren't they?
Yeah, probably. But I mean, I think it's a really unusually cruel and vicious punishment. It's like the modern form of exile and banishment, no less. Countries used to say, short of the death penalty, you were exiled. And being debanked is very similar. I mean, that's why Nigel Farage launched this whole lightning rod for a re-examination of the woke capture of institutions by saying he may have to leave the country because it does constitute a form of exile. I think the reaction has been astonishing. I am stunned at how this is being spun by certain commentators. Now, I'm quite preoccupied with psychology, despite not being a psychologist, because it's been the train of my last two books, The State Sphere and Free Your Mind. And so I look at some of the cognitive dissonance that's at play right now, and you see very well-known commentators and politicians saying, oh, but it's just Nigel Farage and it's just an elite bank, which is a form of minimisation. But if you swapped his name for somebody else with a different political persuasion, or for a different bank, and the reaction would of course be different. So he's absolutely done something, I think, apocalyptic in the sense of an unveiling for how institutions are captured by a form of ideology. I find the defence of Alison Rose because she's a woman and it's a blow for feminism absolutely unconscionable. The fact is, if you have equality, men and women should be treated the same way. If anything, and this is entirely unsubstantiated, I think women can be worse of following this sort of ideology. Now, the other aspect of this is, which I'm going to pin squarely on Dame Alison Rose, is that the report, the dossier that Coutts compiled upon him was really nasty, and it was quite bizarre, and it made very personal accusations. You know, he was accused of being a grifter and racist, and so it's been compiled from the perspective of a moral vantage point, like they at Coutts are all better than him. They don't like him, and yet from that moral vantage point, she broke client confidentiality, which should be unthinkable for a member of staff from any bank, but she's the CEO. Now that is elitist, to think that you're above the rules that are there to protect everybody.
Yes, because we know full well that had this information been disclosed by a bank teller or someone on that level, their job would have been on the line within, I mean, they would have gone within days, and yet there was still this idea of the board of directors getting behind Dame Alison Rose and saying, well, she still had our support. I mean,
has she not committed a crime?
I mean,
sorry to interrupt, but I'm really angry. I mean, has she not committed a crime? She's breached the client confidentiality.
The sheer arrogance of that, and I'm glad that the CEO of Coutts, Peter Flavel's, also now resigned. But interesting to see no Rachel Reeves defence there, because he wasn't a woman. But it's fascinating to see, as you said, the reaction from people and how the left have suddenly become the greatest champions and defenders of banks, which, you know, just in 2008 we can remember the left having those Occupy Wall Street, Occupy London, and Occupy even St Paul's Cathedral. Banks were the enemy. But now that banks have embraced woke ideology, suddenly they've become friends. You know, these are fair weather friends. But what's interesting to look at is how banks have actually changed, because, you know, banks used to be the small c traditional conservative institutions that really resonated with people. You had your local bank manager, they were embedded in the community. NatWest always had vernacular architecture and neoclassical architecture on its buildings. Suddenly it's converted now, where they've withdrawn themselves completely from local communities, branches have collapsed, and they've now basically instead got these showering internationalist style skyscrapers in mega cities, populated by United Nations world of employees, completely removed. They are the somewheres and the anywheres. That's the journey. They've gone from being the small c conservatives' ally to now the ally of people who have progressive ideologies. And of course, Coutts became political 2 years ago when it signed up to these B Corps values. Now, we've spoken many times on this channel about companies allied with Stonewall, and how a lot of the trans nonsense we've seen has been through corporations and government departments wanting to get their Stonewall award for being good allies or good friends or whatever. But it's not just Stonewall doing this. There are a myriad other organizations, including Mermaid, for example, but also this B Corps, which has the environment, diversity, and inclusion as its key mantras. And this is why we're seeing these moves that we've seen over the last 2 years, is the politicization of our banking system through these outside organizations.
Can I say one more thing about this as well? I mean, while I think this is really important, it's nothing short literally of apocalyptic, if we mean in sense of unveiling. We're really understanding what kind of fetid surveillance, monitoring and moral judgment's gone behind closed doors, whether it's shadowy government censorship and surveillance units or our high street banks. it's also showing how pervasive these attitudes are, not just within the banks, but on the outside. So there's a GMB presenter called Adil Ray, and he tweeted something about this in defence of Coutts, and said that attitudes like Nigel Farage's shouldn't be permissible in any environment. And that harkens back to the idea of exile, that there are certain views that are not permissible in any environment. What would happen to those views? What exactly is it they want? Where does it go?
The thing is, with him, you see, that was a very good example. He did 2 tweets, one was about banks and one was about the environment, I think. As you say, he said, these are dangerous views which have no place, should not be allowed. It's actually...
In any environment.
Yes, and the extraordinary thing is that one can still be shocked, actually, by the blatant, expression of these views. This is the authentic voice of these people coming out. But there's a lot of, as you say, I mean, for example, there's a lot of stuff that is really not going to age well. For example, did you see Constantine kissing on Newsnight? And it was Paul Mason, the lefty thing, basically defending these banks, and it's just quite extraordinary. But I think this is the point you say about the unveiling, and to me, it is like, I've used this comparison before, but it's not unlike, Al Capone being done for tax evasion, because it's sort of like we always are looking at the public sphere and we're looking at museums, and wouldn't it be great to see that head of that museum going for decolonizing them? And lo and behold, it comes out of a completely different area, almost by accident.
Okay, well, this is woke capitalism, isn't it?
Yes.
And woke capitalism is one of the issues which has been allowed to flourish over the last few years without any exposure, without any examination that we're getting. But the problem with woke capitalism is that it's always the virtue signaling of the most superficial kind, because they can look good on their Twitter accounts, they can look good on social media, they can put up pride flags outside their windows. But then, as we just seen yesterday, NatWest's profit were announced yesterday, of 3.6 billion higher, 300 million higher than was expected, because of the high interest rates that they're benefiting from on loans and so forth. And yet they haven't given that same interest rate benefit to savers. People who've actually done the good thing and saved up their money are not getting any of the benefits. And surely, if you want to actually show your social justice merits, you would want to ensure that there's parity between the interest rates you're earning on loans and you're giving that same interest rate to savers. And I think that speaks volumes. This is all performative gestures without any substance behind it.
Sure, absolutely. And I mean, you couldn't pin this specific crime onto Coutts, but if you think back to the subprime mortgage lending and the banking disaster of 2008, banks have got serious sin sheets. There's other problems to talk about at home, but there's something here about coming into the private world, because they were talking about Nigel Farage secretly behind closed doors. They were talking about lawfully held political views. So he's being punished for lawfully held political views. There's no tolerance for pluralism, for different perspectives. And what they're really doing is they're projecting. They're accusing him of things that they themselves are guilty of. They've conspired, because they were talking about him behind closed doors, and the CEO was talking to the BBC, and it's all secretive. But they accuse him of intolerance, essentially, don't they? And yet they're also guilty of intolerance. And it's coming right into our private lives. I just think of a bank as somewhere where I expect them to look after my money.
But don't you remember?
And not to think about my political point of view or anything about me personally. That should be none of their business.
I remember, I've been with NatWest, for 40 years, about the same as Nigel, actually. And I remember going along and seeing my bank manager. He was named Mr. McDonald, his name was. And you used to go along and see them. And I remember when I was starting out in TV, I took him to get an overdraft. I took him a sample of one of the programs on a video, just to say, look, I'm actually doing it. Look, give us, and it's innocent days, isn't it? But I think, with this, you mentioned, that they've made a great fuss, or some people have, about the fact that she's a woman and everything. Whatever, male or female, 5.2 million is the salary, or rather the remuneration, shall we say, and then 5 million. It brings out the lefty in me.
Oh,
I'm sorry, it really does.
That's elite, isn't it? £5 million salary.
If you couldn't make it up in a play by David Hare, could you?
No, but there's a lot of these people in these kind of
makes your resignation
sinecures.
that much more palatable, doesn't it?
Exactly. But just everything, everything about it.
But the thing, but to expand on Laura's point, she's absolutely right. I mean, it's not just Nigel Farage who has a dossier, right? We now know that the average person apparently has their social media accounts examined by banks now prior to accepting them as clients. This, I think, is the scariest thing of all that we've learned. And it's not just Kutzer, of course. We're talking about another 3 banks were revealed to have been doing this stuff as well last week too. So this is very sinister, and it edges us ever closer towards this Chinese social credit system.
Yes.
This is exactly what we have. We discussed it before. I mentioned the famous Black Mirror episode. This is fast becoming reality. If you're denied access to a mortgage, you're denied a bank account, if you're denied access to public transport even in the future, you can just see every level at which your behavior is being modified and is being dictated by how you are received by allegedly your neighbours.
Absolutely. So there's a sense in which this is genuinely potentially a lightning rod for change. Let's be optimistic and hope it is. But on the other hand, it could also be a massive smoke and mirrors distraction from what's really going on, because while you've got ministers saying dossiers shouldn't be compiled on citizens and everyone has the right to a bank account, at the same time the Bank of England is consulting on identity-based central bank digital currencies. And they give examples of how that could work in their own discussion papers. So for instance, you could drive up to a petrol pump in your smart car, and the petrol pump will decide if you get petrol or not and just charge you automatically. Now, right now, we're kind of moaning about ULEZ or paying per mile for driving, and you can see this kind of constriction on the private motorist. Well, it's quite possible in an identity-based CBDC future that you drive up to the petrol pump and it says no more petrol for you, or we didn't like your views on social media. So really, it's this potential future we should be even more alarmed about.
Yeah. Well, as you say, I mean, this thing, right, I don't think it is just smoke and mirrors at the moment. This thing has made me feel kind of optimistic. It just made me feel, oh God, there's a breach in the wall. But, we'll have to see it's a breach in the wall.
Well, if the Bank of England, pulls back on identity-based CBDCs, I'll agree with you.
But the problem once again here is that we've had 13 years of conservative rule where nothing has been done on this, and don't tell me people didn't know. I mean, no one is closer to the banks than the Conservative Party. They know exactly what's been going on. We're now, 18 months away from the next election. The chance that any real meaningful legislation will be enacted by that time, I think, is highly doubtful. And if you don't think the Tories have done anything on this, my gosh, you don't expect Labour to do anything at all. And of course, it looks full well that we'll have probably 2 terms at least of a Labour government coming up. So actually, I'm not as hopeful as you may be.
Two terms of a Labour government, possibly 3 terms of Sadiq Khan, because he's going for this kind of. Well, actually, I don't think there's ever been any limitation written in to the mayoralty. So he's going that. Mention him because he likes to control our language and everything like that. Knife crime can go hang. He likes to control our language. New thing out this week, a new campaign. You must have seen it. Broadly, this word mate, this kind of hashtag mate, which is sort of like drawn out so as to basically suggest a kind of way of saying mate. This is all about stopping violence or discouraging men from being violent towards women and girls. Before we talk about it, actually, let's just take a look at the ad which kind of launched it. Here we are.
At least we ain't playing it against girls like last week. Pointless.
Yeah.
The order saved on my phone. Go large? Feel like these large ones in my DMs? I don't know about you lot yet, but I'm definitely in the mood for spicy breasts now. Is that a bird running the line? So what, now I've got women telling me I'm wrong about football as well?
That's untrue, bro.
What do they know about the game, man? Bro, you need to lay down the ground rules straight away.
Is that what you did with that girl you took out in Shoreditch?
Wow. Nah, she ghosted me. Dumb bitch. Probably wouldn't know a good thing if it slaps her in the face. Someone I'd gladly do if I see her again.
Does this kind of work? Do you think this kind of thing, Laura?
Well, it should do, because it's using a number of behavioural science tricks, and yet it doesn't. It completely fails. It's really cringeworthy. He's the subject, Sadiq Khan is the subject of widespread derision for this total waste of our money.
Yeah.
And not only that, he's ruined the word mate completely. I can't even say the word mate without feeling really angry now. And on the word mate, Ogilvy even produced a poster explaining why mate sounds the way it does in the campaign. It's this elongated vowel, which gets your attention, as does the snappy consonant at the end, mate. And of course, this is really not very different to how Barbara Woodhouse used to train dogs to sit. Sit, elongated vowel, sharp T. Essentially, Sadiq Khan is treating us all like Pavlov's dogs. Pavlov trained dogs to salivate when he rang a bell. I mean, I really dislike this ad for a number of reasons. It uses social conformity. It shows men how they should behave in a group and what the consequence is if they deviate from the group behaviour. And of course, the poor chap that's set up to be the fall guy, the bad sexist one, is the only white one in the group, which I can't help feeling is no accident. It gives you efficacy, so it shows you what action to take if somebody deviates from the social conformity, which is, you say, mate to them. Anyone who has sons or knows young men, I have 2 teenage boys, knows they talk about girls all the time, and in a way, why shouldn't they? It's just a natural instinct. This doesn't mean that I'd ever encourage my sons to be disrespectful about women. I'm on it all the time, I can tell you. But there's something, again, a bit like Coots Bank, of interfering in the private space. So Sadiq Khan's response to misogyny is to try to tell young men how to behave when they're on their own. No, they're in a living room. They're not harassing a woman on a train. They haven't touched somebody inappropriately. They're just having a little chat. And the poor white guy says, I'm defo in the mood for spicy breasts. And they're all supposed to say, mate, and shame him for having made a little joke about saying the word breasts. I think London's got much bigger misogyny and violence against women problems than a group of young men playing video games and having a chat with each other. I think it's a complete waste of our money.
The language used was kind of slightly old-fashioned, wasn't it? Some of the comments, I wouldn't mind a bit of that or something.
I was just thinking,
we don't talk like this.
If that's misogynist, my God, that means every single episode of Up Pompeii and the Carry On films is automatically gone, let alone Donald McGill's saucy seaside postcards, all of which were references to, big choppers and all sorts of things going on. I mean, that is really an attack on one of the key foundation blocks of British humour, which is innuendo and double entendre. I mean, gosh, generations of us have grown up enjoying that sort of humour, and it carries on ironically in comedies today. Even on the BBC, you see it with what's that show called? Not Going Out, for example. They still use innuendo and double entendres, which would fall foul of Sadiq Khan. I mean, we know what's going on here, don't we? Sadiq Khan has failed on every measure as a mayor, from crime to housing. These are well beyond his remit, dealing with these sorts of issues, but they're distractions, and there are ways for him to be seen to be appealing to his base and distract them away from the appalling knife crime that we're seeing, and from every other standard by which London is now declining. And of course, the mayor is reticent to ever attack any ethnic minority, except of course for the fact that white men are actually an ethnic minority within London. And of course, we know why misogyny is rising in London, of course, don't we? It's because, of course, of the vast immigrant population that's come into London, and we're seeing a rise in homophobia, we're seeing a rise in anti-Semitism, and we're seeing a rise in misogyny. And I'm just wondering, has this video been translated into Urdu? Has this video been translated into Arabic? I don't think so. The people who are actually more than anything responsible for the rise of misogyny aren't the people who traditionally say mate. Well, I don't say mate. Do I say chap? I don't know what I would say in this context. These are the bigger issues that aren't being addressed. There is a problem with misogyny, but there's also like this new campaign about stopping sexual staring on the tube, for example. That was never an issue in decades previously. What's changed? Well, it's not, of course, the people are targeted in these videos. I think it's very sinister to be undermining white working class British boys now, when we know full well that they are the least achieving. But the other issue here is, what is misogyny? Because if you look at the mayor's definition of it, it's activity which is competitive and confident. Now that's a remarkable thing to say, competitiveness and confidence. This goes to the wider issue of the attack on masculinity, but also the attack on the West. this undermining. The reason that the West became the great civilization it was because of its competitiveness and because of its confidence. And there's been this undermining from within our culture of those two key ingredients that make society strong, that I think are a reason that we're in the mess that we're in today.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's interesting that point, by the way, about the film, which it hit me. It brought back memories of a film that they did 15 years ago. I think it was in Rotherham, and it was one of those public information films about grooming gangs, and they absolutely turned on its head the situation. So it was a group of young white guys in the car going after a girl. Look, it's not a matter of racism. This was just fact. You know?
Well, if you remember with that video, originally it was an Asian groomer, and then they had to reshoot it because they were scared of. So you're exactly right. It's even worse. They actually made one version and decided they had to have the white person as the villain in it.
So I mean, this ad combines both a fear of racism, fear of accusation of racism, with genuine racism by pinning all the blame on the poor white guy. You know, it was really unfortunate, but it speaks to something else, which is responsibilization. You know, as we both said, he's not dealing with bigger problems, he's focusing on something which is scarcely a problem at all. If the worst thing I had to worry about in life was hearing somebody say spicy breasts somewhere in public, I'd be so pleased, you know. But it's always our fault. It's not his fault as mayor, it's not systemic problems, it's not political problems, it's your fault as the citizen. You've said something a bit naughty. They want the world to be completely joyless, humourless, and frankly sexless. What is this actually, an attack on sexual instincts? Because they're not going away. But they want this kind of dull, totalitarian world where you can't look at somebody on a train. How do I know if someone's looking at me, whether it's a misogynistic stare or they're just gazing into the distance or they're just looking at something I'm wearing? Should I be frightened? You know, the whole thing is just mad. It's a constant intrusion on us as private individuals, and it's a responsibilization on us as citizens which detracts from political failings.
Well, you know, yes. Interestingly though as well, it is a political ideology at work in that words are violence. Because I remember when I was on the assembly having to ask them something about, you know, it was actually the Harry Miller situation. And the policeman there at the time, the senior policeman said, yes, but we do know that in countless cases, we just absolutely know that basically, you know, liking a bad tweet or saying the wrong thing does go up to physical attack. This is a kind of article of faith with them, these people. So he'd just say, if you just start off with the kind of low grade stuff, like saying mate or whatever, then somehow that's going to kind of deal with it. I think to an extent they genuinely believe that words, you know, automatically mean that you are going to start going out and being a rapist, even if you say something off colour. You know, where is the real connection there? There isn't one.
Well, if you think words are violence, which of course is nonsense, although words have a great deal of power, then you could assume that a word like mate, I can't barely say it without rolling my eyes and feeling really angry, mate, sounding more like a sheep, then you might think the word mate can save people. And of course it's nonsense. This is the problem with behavioural science wonks who are overly paid in ad agencies wasting the taxpayers' money thanks to Sadiq Khan. They don't understand people. Oh, do you know what it reminds me of? It's like it's like some of the ads for the COVID vaccine. There were ads on social media to try to persuade young people to get the COVID-19 vaccine, and it was and they said get the shot, as though you were actually going to get a tequila shot or something. You know, there's no confusion here. Young people know which sort of shot they're taking. They're trying to make it kind of sexy, glamorous, fun, and about going out. Total fail. But also the other comparison with COVID here is there was a lot of responsibilization in those campaigns. Look him in the eyes and tell him you never break the rules, as though people were dying because some random person broke the rules, rather than the fact that hospitals are a bit like mini cities for infection and we didn't have enough PPE. You know, it's always trying to pin the blame on you.
That was a particularly egregious one, wasn't it? That one of look them in the eye. You know, that was awful, wasn't it? Playing on people's kind of guilt and all of that was terrible.
Yeah, really nasty horror film aesthetic and pinning all the blame on the private citizen.
Well, one thing is that with Khan, you know, was going to build loads of houses, for example. This is a nice, neat segue here. And he's failed to do so, of course. one of the initiatives that's come up this week, not quite sure how far it is as a proposal, but it's that essentially planning laws are going to be kind of relaxed and changed to allow people to extend their houses, for shops to be converted into flats, for I think takeaway shops were for some mentioned particularly, all to try to basically lessen this chronic lack of housing that we have at the moment. I mean, what do you make of this? To me, when they say, oh, so we can turn houses into flats and that will revitalise the area, I'm thinking, what are you talking about? It seems to do the absolute opposite. Do you not think?
It's the absolute opposite. When I first heard this story, I actually felt quite sad because 6,000 shops have been lost from the high street in the last 5 years due to lockdowns and crippling business rates and costs. Now, okay, a lot of people do their shopping differently now, and there are lots of challenges that the high street faces, but you are not going to reinvigorate areas by turning shops into houses. It makes me sad about business, and what are we doing to protect businesses? Oh, well, we've put corporation tax up. You know, this says something quite sad and negative about the economy and the high street. But if that's 6,000 shops and that's 6,000 homes, it's not really very many homes. And the planners never really talk about the big numbers involved in the planning task that we really face. So net migration in the year to June was 600,000. So the Conservative target of 300,000 was only ever going to meet half of the last year's influx of people. So it was never going to be enough anyway. In fact, according to the Migration Watch website, if you were to meet the housing demand from immigration at the moment, you'd have to build a house every 5 minutes. Day and night. So we're not really talking about the big problem. It sounds like a nice plan, but doesn't really go anywhere to solving the housing problem.
Well, no, the thing is, you have these endless phantom discussions about housing in which you are not really allowed to talk about one of the main drivers, I'd say the main driver, which is the population going up by 8 million in whatever, 10, 15 years.
7 million of it was from immigration.
So
that's the really big cause of I mean, at some point somebody has to say what's the kind of ideal population, what's the ideal net migration, and how do we meet the housing needs? No one's having that conversation. Talking about how to turn destroyed businesses into homes just touches the tiniest tip of the issue.
So yeah, well, I've spoken many times here about the connection between migration and the housing crisis, so I agree entirely on those points, but I disagree completely with you in terms of this proposal, which I think is an excellent proposal. It doesn't go far enough, but it actually puts into place Sir Roger Scruton's ideas for revitalising cities. This is not about closing down shop. This is actually a way to revitalise places by creating urban density on a scale that we have in city centres currently, and that you also get in the great European city centres, which basically are 5 and 6 story buildings. So this isn't a question of just closing down shops and transforming them. This is about building on top of shops, building on top of betting shops.
What, literally
on top of the buildings, adding 3 or 4 stories on top of these. So basically, the British High Street is one of the most miserable sites in the world if you go there. They're all betting shops, arcades, charity shops, estate agents. What this does is it will bring people back into cities, but also will bring people into the suburbs, because suburbs will now begin to resemble city centres, whereby you'll have 4 or 5 story buildings. For humans, high-rises are anathema. High-rises are antisocial, anti-human. Ever since Prince Charles and Queen and Terry were discussing this in the 80s, we've known that it's buildings of around 5 to 6 stories that are human, and if they're built correctly, importantly with aesthetically pleasing styles, they will be places where people will want to come, and they will revitalise these streets, because you will actually have a reason for people to shop and retail down there, because they'll be living above the shop quite literally, and so you will have more cafes, more perhaps bookshops and libraries, bringing back in the sorts of businesses that you need for a thriving community. You won't need to travel so far to work and so forth. It's a question of creating in the suburbs what we enjoy so much about city centre living. So I think that it's a superb idea. It's also the part of the plan is to actually face up to the reality that as holy as the green belt is, for example, There's lots of brownfield sites on the green belt, but because of NIMBYism, Tory MPs are unwilling to actually tackle. So you can actually build on a lot of greenfield sites without in any way reducing, the idyllic pastoral landscape of this country, of England's green and pleasant land.
Well, I mean, are you convinced by that argument?
Well, I might have misunderstood Gove's plans, which I thought was to
there are
change
two
the
parts.
use. Oh, okay, because I thought it was talking about changing the use.
I was about to say that.
Yeah.
You were talking, when you were talking there about Roger Scruton and everything, you had in mind things like this Cambridge plan, which is it on paper or is it actually done, the Cambridge one?
Oh, well, it's drawn on paper and everything else, but it hasn't got an approval. It's just been announced.
But there's that, and there's the other one, which is basically converting places. I just sort of thought, I mean, when you bring people back, when I think of all the places that have actually just been converted into luxury apartment, no apartment is ever anything other than luxury now. I think of it.
Well, that's an important other issue, yeah.
No, but there's the pubs, banks, shops, whatever, and you sort of think this is all very well and everything.
No, this isn't about that. This is about industrial units, right? These are those. If you remember the opening scene of The Office with what's his name, Ricky Gervais, you've got these scenes of Slough. It's converting those types of buildings, office blocks which we know are no longer being used because people are working from home and are more digital, industrial sites which aren't needed, manufacturing places that aren't being used any longer. It's turning those ugly parts of the city, as was done in Canary Wharf, as was done in Nine Elms in London and Battersea, like the 1980s warehouse conversions. It's about revitalising those parts of cities. The whole point here is that the government is so scared about annoying Tory voters, they don't want to build next to nice towns and so forth, so they're trying their best to use up all the space that they can inside cities. The other point here you make is a very good one though, and it's the fact that the housing that's been built for the last 20 years has been housing designed for professional couples. These are luxury apartment buildings. Even when it's affordable housing, they're usually 2 to 3 bedroom apartments. The idea of having an actual place for a family has gone by the wayside now, and that's of course one of the reasons why you've seen the white working class leave London so much, is because they are no longer able to find suitable housing in this place. So that's another issue entirely, the type of housing that's built. But the overarching policy must be beauty. Beauty, beauty, beauty. This is the thing that all proper traditional conservatives, not neocons or neoliberals, should be espousing, is to create communities that are attractive and healthy, because it's a healthy mind that leads to healthy people.
The thing is, aren't they? Look, I mean, you talk about the single professional people or couples. Canary Wharf, perfect example. In fact, you almost never see a family there. Actually, I mean, Canary Wharf quite a lot. Never see a family. You just see these endless things going up, business moving out, more and more residential things going up. Where is the dynamic that's going to keep this afloat? Where is it going to come from? I mean, the idea that basically, you've got to create for families. The problem is, surely, is that there aren't enough families to create for. I mean, this sounds
well,
crazy.
there are families.
Just can't afford to live in London.
It's migration. Migration is fueling. That we know that where the birth rates are higher. But you're quite right. I mean, the reason that you have this huge surge in luxury apartment buildings, I know for well because I've gone to the launch of a few of them. They have the launch before they're even built. 1/3 are sold in Asia, 1/3 are sold to Russians and people in the Middle East, and you're left with about 1/3 or 1/4 that are actually available for British people to actually purchase. Too often these apartment buildings are basically Swiss deposit boxes in the sky, that they're in there as investments, whereas there is a huge argument for building. I mean, look, we know from every survey that people always prefer traditional architecture to high rises and this sort of thing. I don't disagree with that. And so places like Poundbury that the King made in the 1980s, which were ridiculed by architects, have become so successful now that they're trying to expand upon it and build new Poundburys. That's the sort of quality housing you can build with using stone and local techniques. You can actually create perfectly viable communities where families will thrive.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree with you more about the beauty. It seems to me there are so many areas of cities, especially London, that you walk through, and it feels as though the architecture's been designed to hurt your soul. It's horrible. We've had such beautiful architecture, and then we slap these ugly buildings next to them. I mean, I like the eclecticism of London, but it's a bit much.
I think yes, there's a great Twitter account. He's also an admirer of the NCF, by the way. It's called Culture Critic. You know, he's followed by Elon Musk, and a great guy. He's always pointing this out.
Yeah.
Always pointing these things out. And he says, you know, when did we stop wanting to build beautiful things? And a lot of people put it down to loss of religion, you know, for example. I don't know whether I go along with that, but essentially, yes, you know, that these things are there, they are utterly alienating, aren't they? I've tried to find beauty in brutalism. I really have, you know, like you force yourself to National Theatre, for example, in London, and you look and think, actually, you know, the wonderful thing about being older is you no longer have to worry about that. You say, no, actually, it's awful. I don't want to be in it.
And the great test is all the brutalist architects actually lived in lovely Edwardian arts and crafts houses themselves.
And also Richard Rogers, you know, the guy who did all the, you know, all with the innards on the outside. Beautiful Georgian house on Royal Square, just off the King's Road.
The only one that's only kind of is okay is the Barbican, because it's populated by really rich gentrified people that keep it nice. That's the truth. I mean, otherwise brutalist architecture is just an eyesore.
Hideous, isn't
but
it?
a lot of the skyscrapers are, for me, they look like big dark fangs rising out of the earth.
Yeah.
And the thing that's fascinating is that all of these new buildings that are being the chrome and steel skyscrapers and public buildings aren't going to be there in 100 years, not even meant to last that long. We aren't actually proud enough of our buildings to actually think or believe that they might be here for a millennia, whereas we know full well that the buildings that the Georgians and the Victorians and everyone else has built, like the Tower of London or Parliament, will be there long after we've shuffled off this mortal coil.
I think the problem is now that modern architecture, you know, some of it can be, I quite like, some of it, but there's a particularly soulless global kind of feel to just go along Vauxhall, you know, go along on the, I come in on the train, you go along, and there are these kind of, they could be in they could be in Dubai, they could be in Miami, it doesn't really matter, and the people who live in them don't really care.
Well, the best architecture is always vernacular, not designed by any architects or draftsmen, designed by local people in local styles. And there's been the loss of vernacular architecture and the cancerous spread of this international architecture. You know, whether you're in Japan or Saudi Arabia or London, I think that's been one of the most depressing things to see in the last 50 years.
Have you been to Poundbury? Do you know it all?
I have driven through it. I haven't spent much time there, but I tell you, I went recently, and that was around Canada Water and Surrey Keys, and I felt like I was in an anywhere place, and I felt like I was in the 15-minute city of my hellish future, because, you know, there was everything, you know, yoga studio here, bar there, shop there, and I thought, oh no, these people don't need to go anywhere, then they've got everything have there and they're stuck here. I felt like I could be anywhere, and there was something really depressing about it.
Have you been to Poundbury?
No, I'm very keen to go.
No.
I've researched a lot, and I've
well, I know. I just look at I just Poundbury. You know, whereas the then Prince of Wales, Prince Charles, was behind. To me, it looks a bit like Camberwick Green. I mean, there is that.
But people like that.
But
that's the thing.
I've got very fond memories of Camberwick Green.
That's what people like. But you're a metropolitan elitist here. You see? No, this is what people absolutely like.
Cheap shot. Right, thank you very much for today. Thanks very much. Do hope you come back again. Actually, you know, and don't wait for the next book. Come back for before then. There we go. That's it for Newspeak. Again, please take a look at our site, westerncivilization.co.uk, and we shall see you next time. Thank you. Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.